Hello, this is General Tommy Franks. Welcome to the Core Principles of Leadership podcast, a product of our Leadership Institute and Museum. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this unique experience where once a month we invite some of our world's most interesting people from a variety of different industries and backgrounds to share their experience and to give us some insight into how we can develop as better leaders. We'll ask tough questions and provide ideas on how we can work together to find common objectives that don't require compromise of our individual values. Enjoy the podcast, and remember, leaders are not born, they're developed.
Hello, and welcome to episode 43 of the Core Principles of Leadership with General Tommy Franks podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jill Green, and today our guest is podcaster, coach, and speaker Bailey Miles. Bailey's focus is helping leaders and teams build excellence in their life, leadership, and legacy. A former basketball coach, Bailey has worked alongside some of the best leaders from the NBA and Team USA. In addition to coaching, Bailey works in real estate development and investing. Through his weekly podcast, Building Excellence with Bailey Miles, he has spoken with some of the top leaders of our time, including business icons like the CEO of Ritz-Carlton and Starbucks. Bailey's mission is to share what he is learning to enable others to accomplish their goals and live out their God-given purpose. Before we begin our episode, we'll have a word from one of our major sponsors, REI Oklahoma. REI Oklahoma is proud to be part of the General Tommy Franks Leadership Institute and Museum in the production and distribution of these podcasts designed to inspire leaders and difference makers. At REI Oklahoma, we have been working with small business leaders, entrepreneurs, and people who are driven to succeed for years. Highly motivated people working to own their own businesses, live in their own homes, and make the world a better place since its beginning. REI Oklahoma has continued to identify hurdles and deliver holistic solutions to create job growth and help neighborhoods thrive in both rural and urban communities. REI Oklahoma looks forward to visiting with you about helping your business and community grow. Visiting reiok.org or call 1-800-658-2823 to start the conversation.
The LaBarge family is a fourth-generation Oklahoma family. That may not sound like a long time, but our grandfathers were born here, within the Comanche Nation, before the land grants. We are the proudest sponsor of the Tommy Franks 4-Star Leadership Podcast. We hope listeners will heed the words of these distinguished men and women who have served our country at the highest levels and across all walks of life.
All right, it is so good to have you with us today, Bailey. So before we get started, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's an honor to be here, and I appreciate you guys having me. I'm actually not too far away. I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and grew up here for most of my life, with the exception of a couple of years I lived in South Carolina. But yeah, I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, with thankfully two amazing parents that they were always there and supported me. They were always encouraging you to kind of go out and chase whatever you feel led to do, and that was really a blessing in my life growing up. Have great parents. Played sports throughout high school. Wound up going to Furman University. Was going out there to play sports. Wound up kind of getting involved in the basketball staff, and I always knew I wanted to coach college professional basketball. So I pursued that for a little while. Moved back to Oklahoma State University, where I finished up college, and then wound up going back out to Furman University in South Carolina on their men's basketball staff. And then from there, wound up kind of getting into coaching and moved back to Tulsa again and got in real estate development, started the podcast, and that's kind of what I do today.
Great. So, well, we appreciate you joining us today. So, when I was looking at your podcast, you are brave enough to do this, it looks like once a week. So, you have had several years of great guests. So, and it made me think, so this summer we had our 17th annual 4-star leadership program. And one of the young ladies that was there, she approached me and she said that she had reached out to several leaders in her community and her area to come to her high school to speak, and no one would ever get back with her. And so she asked me how I got leaders to come to the program to speak to them. And I kind of laughed at her and I told her that, I'm not above stalking people to, I really use LinkedIn a lot to try to find leaders that might fit with our mission and that sort of thing. But in all honesty, I think it's just being persistent and believing in our mission. And so, with your weekly podcast, like I said, you've had amazing leaders as guests. How would you say you approach prospective guests to get them to agree to be on with you?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And it's something that when I was getting into coaching and basketball, I didn't have any connections into the coaching world whatsoever. I'd obviously played a little bit, but I would write letters just about to not every single college or program or NBA program, but write letters to a lot of the guys that I admired for obviously the success they had, but their character and integrity and align with the values that they had. And so that was kind of how I did it in basketball. And it really does translate into the podcast too, because just like, you guys have this podcast going on, you're trying to identify people that align with the character, integrity, the values, the work ethic, all these characteristics that encompass the things you guys care about. And so reaching out to people that are like-minded like that really helps. LinkedIn is a great way if you're looking specifically for how to reach out to people. LinkedIn's a great way to do that. Um, a lot of email addresses can be found on the internet. It just depends on how long you want to search for them, and that's something that I definitely do a lot of as well. Is just kind of research into the backgrounds of the people that I'm wanting to have on the podcast, and find a way to get the email. Which sometimes I think it's I'm trying to remember the exact one that I use, but it's maybe either True People Search or Zoom Info are another ways you can do that as well. And then from there, you'll have contact info that you can reach out, and that's kind of a good way through email is that I've been able to do that.
Yeah, and that's I told her it's kind of amazing the people that you actually do that will respond to you. Many times people are busy with, the same times as we are, but it's been really great to get some really great speakers, and I'm impressed with the amount of speakers that you have had. So when I was looking through your podcast, we share several of the same guests, and but one that stood out to me was Eric Maddox, and he
Mm.
has spoken to our students for the last 2 years at 4-star, and he has such an amazing background. But I think what stands out most to me about him is his ability. He admits very openly that when he went in to be an interrogator in the Middle East during the war, he really didn't know what he was doing. So he did it by the textbook, what was taught to him at school. And I mean, it just didn't work. So he had the courage to kind of buck the system, and he changed interrogation to a way that, it worked for him. And we hear all the time, we have always done it like this, or it's working, why change? So, how do you think new leaders should approach situations like that when people are hesitant against change?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a level of self-awareness you have to have in situations like that to make sure you're going in with the right approach instead of, hey, this needs to change automatically. I think you have to have a little bit of humility. You have to have confidence in yourself and maybe what you feel like needs to change. You need to be prepared. I think that's another level of it when you're going into something like that. Make sure you know what you're going to talk about or want to talk about. State your case, why that's important to you, and why you think there should be some change. And then I would say probably adapt when you have that conversation and make sure that you can really put your best case forward to the proponent of why this really matters. I think a lot of people always want to see why this is a better way than what has been done in the past. And so when you're prepared, when you come in with a little bit of humility, and then you also have the self awareness of going in there and navigating the conversation effectively instead of going in there just trying to make a statement. I think that's really important, I would say, going into a conversation like that.
Yeah, most definitely. I loved one of the questions on your website. You ask, it says, what kind of person would you be if you kept the promises you made to yourself? I
Mm.
think that hits home with me because my life is so much different than what I had imagined it to be. And in a good way, I have an amazing family. I feel like the luckiest person in the world getting to do the job that I get to do every day. But looking back, my promise to myself was to make my dad happy and to get a degree in finance. And that did not happen. Finance and that was just not a
Okay.
path that was feasible to me. So, have you met anyone that has ever been able to keep those promises to themselves? And, I mean, I imagine it's hard to, there's so many outside effects that come into, things that we can't control. So has there ever been someone that you have spoken to that's actually been able to do that?
I think there's plenty that have done a good job. Not everyone is going to succeed at every promise. We're all going to fail at times. I think that would probably be the biggest thing. But what some of the best people do, it's kind of funny. I love kind of identifying things and boiling down to make them simple. And sometimes it's not very, um, it doesn't feel super insightful, or it doesn't feel like it's something you think, oh, yeah, well, I heard that. But I was just talking to someone just the other day on the podcast, and we were talking about how extraordinary people don't do extraordinary things. They do the ordinary things consistently more than the ordinary person. And I think that really resonates because, if you can do the right things every single day, so we make a promise to ourselves. I mean, there's so many examples of maybe we want to be in shape. Well, when your alarm goes off at 5:30, you're going to wake up or you're going to roll over. When you get hungry and you've had a long day, you're at the office and you're frustrated, are you going to go and get some fast food real quick, or are you going to stick to a good healthy meal? When you come home, are you going to handle maybe a problem with your spouse in the right way, or are you going to let all that frustration kind of from the day come upon you? I think there's a lot of ways to look at it, and it's how you handle those moments. And can you do those things consistently over time, day in and day out? And then I'm a big fan. I love James Clear's book Atomic Habits, and he always talks about not letting something happen more than 2 times in a row. So you mess up once, don't let the second time happen where you mess up again. Nip it in the bud right there. And so, because what happens is when you mess up one time and that second day comes and you do it again, it's easy to fall into that third day and the fourth day and the fifth day. But if you mess up on that first day and you can come back and counteract that, that second time you can nip it in the bud and restart and kind of flow back into it. So I think that was a really good thing that I heard about that. But some people are great at keeping those promises, but also too understanding what promises you want to make to yourself, and are they something that you really want, or is it something you just think you might want? And when you really want something, I think you're willing to pay the price. I think there was a I'm trying to think of it. It was a little quote that it was a price to prize ratio, and if the prize is clear, the price gets easy. And I thought that was pretty interesting because when you know why you want something, you're willing to pay a price for it. I don't know if that answers your question, but that
Oh
was
no, most definitely. So, and it kind of made me think when General Frank spoke to our kids this last July at Four Star, he told them, he and his wife when he joined the military, it was kind of out of, I don't want to say desperation, but
mm,
he'd failed out of college.
mm,
University of Texas had told him, we don't think that we should really have this partnership anymore. Let's kind of cut our ties. And so he didn't really know what else to do. So he joins the military and he wanted a better life for he and his wife once they got married. And he said, we never really had a plan. There wasn't a plan to be a four-star general. There wasn't really even a
mm.
plan to reenlist the next time my contract was up. It was just, at the moment, okay, this maybe is what we should do. But he worked hard every day. He took his job serious. He took
Mm.
his role in leadership serious. And that's what got him to be the four-star general that he is and everyone still admires today. I,
Yeah,
I think that is a good point.
yeah, and I think what you just talked about, he may not have known he wanted to be a 4-star general, but I think his story is a great example of that. Just do what you can where you're at and do the best job you can at it. And when you look at all these successful people in life, they all have that same pattern of hard work, resilience, a willingness to always give their best in what they're doing. And when they
Hmm.
stumble, they get back up and keep moving forward. And I think General Franks' story in that is a great example of what a common pattern that you see when you talk to so many different leaders across all different spectrums. Those are some of the commonalities that they definitely have.
Yeah. So in our world today, we see all kinds of leaders, and even just as many different leadership styles. So, what would you say sets the great leaders apart from the good leaders?
Hmm. That's a great question. I think there's not a one size fits all for leadership, but if I was to look at some of the people that I've talked to and been around, I think there is some common patterns and commonalities. And really, like I said before, I really love trying to think of how can we synthesize things down and kind of boil them down to make them simple. And there was a guy I had on my podcast named Terry Cook, and he's got a program called Lead Develop Care. And I think at the end of the day, when I've talked to all these different people and been around some people, what has seemed to kind of make sense to me is the idea of lead, develop, care. If you think of great leaders, whether they're coaches, business, military, they lead effectively. So they're casting vision, they're making sure everyone is on the same page and knows where you're going and why you're going there and gets everyone to be able to buy in. I think those are some great leadership principles. But they also, this is probably the one that gets kind of pushed aside most, is develop their people in the organization. They put frameworks and systems in place to make sure that all the people within the organization have opportunity to grow. Because I think if you think about it, when you or I were in something, we want to always like, I think we get the most fulfillment sometimes in something when we can see ourselves growing or we can see opportunity in wherever we're in. And so putting yourself in a position where you have opportunities like that, you're in structures, you have leaders that are helping develop you, they're mentoring you. I think that's a big component of leadership that the best do really well. And then I think care. This is probably one that maybe sounds cheesy, but it's probably the most important. There's a quote: "People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care."
Hmm.
When I look at some of the best coaches or leaders, their people in the organization want to go above and beyond because they know that those people care. They spend time with them. And I don't know if you've ever had a coach or a teacher or someone who's believed in you. You're willing to go above and beyond for that person
Exactly.
because they've invested in you. They care about you. And when you have that, man, that's something that is really, really special because it really helps that organization push beyond, maybe limits that they thought they could never go to because all those things are kind of molded together. And something going back into the care. I just had a guy, since it's a little more military, but Admiral Mike Manazer, and he was the admiral of the Navy, but also the CEO or commanding officer of the USS Nimitz, and then he was a Top Gun pilot and instructor. And he talked about when he was on the Nimitz, he would go down to the mess halls, he would walk all over the ship, and just sit there and talk to the people that were the sailors on the ship, and he would try to get to know their names. And I think there's a lot of insight into just understanding it's important to know people's names and
Mhm.
address them by their names because it just, like, again, it shows you care. And then there was another point where he was walking down, and I can't remember where exactly it was, but there was a room where there was a guy who was scrubbing the deck. It was all greasy, but he just told me he was doing a good job. And he heard the guy talk about how that made such an impact to him and little things like that. I think it's easy to think of the big things, but all these little things add up, and they make leaders be recognized and know that they care. So that's probably some things that I would say.
Hello, this is Dr. Jill Green with the General Tommy Franks Leadership Institute and Museum. I would like to tell you about one of our partner sponsors, Justin Krieger. He has worked as an independent insurance agent at Krieger Insurance Agency in his hometown of Hobart, Oklahoma since 1999. Justin is honored to help with our annual Celebration of Freedom event and has served on the board of directors for the General Tommy Franks Leadership Institute and Museum for many years. He is a fifth generation farmer and rancher in Kiowa County, where cattle, crops, and even insurance is sold with a handshake. Give him a call at 580 726 3076, or stop by the office and speak with Justin, Denise Reeves, or Wendy Block about your insurance needs. Krieger Insurance is thankful for their loyal customers and friends who have supported them through the years and look forward to earning your business as well. Justin feels honored to live in such a great country, and he is proud to be a sponsor of the Core Principles of Leadership podcast. Please enjoy the rest of this podcast experience brought to you by your friends at Krieger Insurance Agency. One of my favorite stories of General Franks, he my husband was military too, so in our museum, we probably have the largest collection of challenge coins in the world. And a lot of them, majority of them were given to him from different people and, commands that he was in and that sort of thing. But in there is just an old, just washer that just has something handwritten on it. And when you hear General Franks talk about that, he was in Germany. He was captain or a major, just a regular, lower to mid ranked officer in the military. And he'd gone to the motor pool one evening and he saw a private working past the time that everybody else had gone home. And he got to know him and he talked to him and asked him why he was still at work. And the private explained to him, that this vehicle is in my care. And if it's not working, then no one else can do their job and this sort of thing. And so he reached in his pocket and gave that private one of his challenge coins for, doing such a great job. And then the next day he went back and talked to that private's commander and explained to him, how impressed he was and what a great job he was doing. And so the commander was like, well, he's over there. Just go tell him. And so he goes over there and talks to him. And that private hands him the washer that he was working with and just gives it to him and says, I wanted to give you my challenge coin. And so most officers would just kind of throw that in their desk and, would leave it there. And the next officer that would come along would be like, what is this? And throw it in the trash. But General Franks kept that his entire time. And that was in the early 80s when he was given this. And it's still, it's in the museum as a showcase. And that's probably one of his favorite things. And it just shows that he cares. And I think that is, one of the things that made him such success is he truly did care. It wasn't just an act. He cared about his soldiers that he led. And still to this day, he'll tell you stories on, just regular old GIs that had an effect on him.
Oh yeah.
And that's just that care. And I think that's maybe what our world lacks the most of right now is that caring element.
Yeah, and I think, as you were saying that story, it made me think of stories in my own life where I've had people that were superior to me that I really
Mhm.
looked up to that took some time to I remember when I was getting into coaching at the time, I'd go work camps in the summer. So Butler University was where Brad Stevens was. And at the time they had just gone to a couple Final Fours. Brad Stevens is now the coach of or he's the president or GM of the Boston Celtics. And I remember going out there and, I had never met Coach Stevens before, but I worked really hard to get into camp. And I remember being out on the pavement in Indianapolis and he had walked up and it's just me and these kids. So I was wondering, why is he walking this way? Because, there's no one else over here. Well, he came over to walk and talk with me. And that was something that at the time, because I had not been around, you know, some guys that I really admired, I was almost, shaking in my shoes because
Mhm.
I was so excited to have him come over and he knew my name. We talked for a long time and those experiences really shaped the the course of my career and what I did and the willingness to go above and beyond for other people as well. And I think if you're in a leadership position, and even if you're not in a leadership position, um, if you're a student in high school, if you're a business leader, you can find someone that would value you taking the time to care and show you care. And I think that's really important because we all can do it no matter what. Because in a sense, we all are leaders in different respects.
Yeah, most definitely. So someone is always looking, and that's what we tell our students that come into Four Star. Somebody, you might not think of yourself as a leader, but somebody is looking up to you, and they're wanting you to be a leader in their eyes. And so you always have to remember that and
Absolutely.
perform that way. So as I said, you've interviewed some amazing leaders, really diverse backgrounds. And so, who has really stood out as a person people should really be paying attention to?
Oh man, that's a really good question. Just some that come to mind. I would say Horst Schulze, he's the founder of the Ritz Carlton, and he has such a unique story. But his book that he wrote is called Excellence Wins, and so obviously my podcast is called Building Excellence, so I really identify with that. I think the simplicity of his message is just whatever you're doing, do it with excellence every single day, day in and day out. And I think there's a story that he shares that I think embodies, when people think of the Ritz Carlton, I would think that they think of the best when it comes to
Mhm.
hotel chains. They do everything at the highest level. It's spick and span, well taken care of. But there was a story where there was a client that had been at the Ritz Carlton and they serve warm cookies, I guess, whenever you get to the room. Well, one of the cookies, whenever the cleaner had gotten up there, had the nuts taken out of the cookie, so there was nuts still left on the bedstand. Well, that cleaner had told the right people to go make a cookie without nuts, a chocolate chip cookie without nuts, and it was delivered to the room. And we're going back; it's a simple thing, but it's when you can do the little things like that and be aware and have people from the cleaner to the CEO all on the same page for the same mission. I think that speaks volumes of the organization. And obviously, there's training that goes into that. They do such a great job of bringing in good people and training them and helping them see why the work that they do matters to the overall mission of the organization. And so it gives people ownership in their jobs, whether they're cleaning, they're cutting the grass, or they're the GM of the hotel. It's all the same, and they all take ownership of it. So that's one that stands out in my mind. Obviously, they've had great success as an organization, but his idea and his philosophy to leadership, I really, really love.
Kind of reminds me, we're in the middle of interviewing for a position, and we had a resume that came across, and one of the applicants had worked at Chick-fil-A. And one of the board members was like, well, she knows customer service if she's worked at Chick-fil-A. And it's true. I mean, that's just one of those restaurants and businesses that really focus on making the customer, a priority. And it shows. So that,
Yeah,
before we had even spoken with them, that was something, well, that's on her resume. So we know that she's great with customers.
yeah. Well, I think you might like this. And we've had a guy named Steve Robinson, who's the former CMO of Chick Fil A, on the podcast, and he was there really right at the forefront of when Chick Fil A started to expand from malls into uh, standalone structures. And so he was there with Truett Cathy and Dan Cathy as they really started to expand. And it was a big decision for them to do that. But one thing that he talked about I thought was really fascinating because I haven't heard this very often. But he says, you don't train culture, you hire it. And I thought that was fascinating because obviously you have components of understanding what culture looks like, the mission of the organization, and Chick Fil A. Anyone that goes to Chick Fil A knows that they're going to be great with customer service. They're going to have friendly people, and they have great systems. But they're bringing in people that align with the mission of the organization, and they're not having to necessarily train them maybe like some organizations would, which I think is just a little bit different thought process because I think it's good to train people as well, but
Yeah.
hiring the right people enables you probably to expedite that process tremendously. And I thought that perspective that he had was fantastic, and it stemmed from the top down with Truett Cathy and how
Mhm.
he wanted his organization to be, and that was a fascinating story of just how they were able to scale from I don't know how much they had or what they started with when he first got there, but they've exceeded that tremendously since he left.
Yeah,
So,
so that is a really good perspective to think about. So that is a good one. So in our workforce today, we probably have the largest generation gap that has ever existed. And that gap is full of different beliefs, work ethics, and leadership styles. How do you believe leaders should begin to understand all the differences, define that common vision so that we can all get on board?
Hmm. I think one of the things that great leaders are able to do, maybe like we touched on before when we're talking about lead, develop, care, is understand what makes each one of us tick. We obviously want to have the overall vision and the mission of where you're going and why you're going there and have everyone buy into that. But everyone's uniquely gifted and talented and has different abilities. And so, how do you tap into that for each individual? And how do you get them to understand and see kind of their future within the story of whatever organization you're leading? And I think there's a lot of commonality. I mean, yes, you got to work hard. Yes, you got to make sure you're on time, things like that. But how can we help someone understand where their place is in the organization and how they can see themselves winning in it too? And I think that comes with maybe empathy. Empathy is a really, I think, an important piece of that. Just under trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes. So obviously, leaders have to make tough decisions. But at the end of the day, if they can try to put themselves in other people's shoes, I think those decisions can be made a lot better than if they didn't have that perspective.
Yeah. So we, at our 4-star program, we bring back 4-star alumni to be counselors. And when I was speaking with one of the counselors, he's a Midwestern boy, didn't have a lot growing up. So, he really had to work hard for what he had. And he was getting frustrated with some counselors that were from other parts of the country. And I explained to him, as leaders, we have to understand that not everyone is going to have the same work ethic as us. To them, they're probably working really hard, and maybe they don't work as hard as you, but you have to understand why before you can even approach them in that, so and that's just something in life that you're going to have to learn. And so, but this little 18 or 19-year-old was getting really frustrated that, he grew up in just a different part of the world than this other person. And he didn't understand why they, you know, didn't want to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning
Yeah,
do the hard work that, he thought everyone should be doing. So, it was really kind of eye opening to him to have to understand that, when you get out in the real world, there's going to be different people that have different backgrounds and beliefs, and
mhm,
that work ethic is one that is really hard for some people to overcome because, with different parents and different upbringings and everything, it's just something that, you have to approach and in a civil way. And that's the other thing that we try to get to. So, and
sure.
with that, so right now we live in a very divisive, world at the moment. And General Franks is always saying that we must learn to disagree without being disagreeable. So, I mean, right now in this world, it's, if you don't agree with me, then we're not friends. I can't be friends with you. I can't follow you on social media. And somehow we have to overcome that because
Uh,
if we all thought the same way or believe it would just be a very boring world. So I'm sure along the lines with that, you've had guests on your podcast that maybe you didn't agree with fully. And so how did you approach that situation?
yeah, I think one thing that I value is I definitely value difference of opinions. Now we all have ideas and things that we think and maybe not agree with everybody on, but I think it's important to kind of just what we talked about just a second ago, empathy, understanding where they're coming from, why they're coming from, the way they think, because we all come from different backgrounds, and there's so many things that go into that of understanding why people are the way they are. Um, and we have to take that in. I can't remember. There was a great video. I don't remember it off the top of my head actually, but anyway, it describes that really well. So you can cut that out because I can't remember it. But I think empathy is really big. It's key. But being able to sit there and ask great questions of why people are the way they are, like getting a chance to try to understand someone. So I think asking great questions is really important. So yeah, I think I want to try to learn from everybody, but it just made me think of this morning. I was interviewing one of the former Amazon execs who started the marketplace business back in the early 2000s, and we were talking about leadership. And what they've done is they would have opportunities where I can't remember what they called it, but it would be called rude Q and A's. So they'd have opportunities to go in and talk in a room, just like I've taught in the military. People will get in the room and talk about the decisions that were made. But once they're out of the room, whoever is in command who makes the decision, they commit to that. They'll voice all the opinions in that room. And then once they make that decision, they move forward and they support that decision. Because the worst thing that can happen is if someone who's not really all in to whatever decisions made or all in for the team and goes out and talks negatively about the decision that was made, that's going to ruin the culture. And that's
Hmm.
not the kind of culture that wants to be established. So I think having opportunities where you can have a rude Q&A, or just like in the military where you come in, close the door, have hard conversations, but know that in the context of the space that you're in, those conversations are trying to make each other better, trying to come to understanding. But then on the same token, whenever you step out, that whatever decision was made that you're committed to, as long as you're part of that organization going forward. But I think it just comes back to empathy, just trying to understand other people. You may not agree with everybody, but that's okay. You don't have to agree with everybody, but you can always respect people for who they are. And I think that's a big component of it. But I like that idea of rude Q&A.
That,
Um,
that is pretty interesting. So, and that was the one thing that when our students arrived in Oklahoma, they came from this year, I believe we had 31 states and two additional countries were here. So we had individuals from 33 different backgrounds. And, just it was amazing. And I told them there was two things that I needed them to do the entire week, and that was to have an open mind and be respectful. And by the end of that week, it was amazing just to see the friendships of people that probably would have never ever met in the real world walk away and have these bonds that really, and it's great to see when you bring people together like that. So what has been the best piece of advice about leading others someone has shared with you?
Yeah, I don't know if it's the best piece of advice, but it's more of a word. I think some of the best leaders lead with a confident humility about them. So they're confident in who they are, what they're doing, but they're also humble enough to listen to everyone. They're also humble enough to understand that they're not someone who knows everything. But I think that term is always, it just has seemed to always embody the best leaders, people that are confident and humble at the same time. So it's a confident humility, and they're always willing to listen to other people.
Oh, that is great advice. So, I always end my podcast with the same question and I ask it to everyone. So, if you could give your 18-year-old self a piece of advice, what would that be?
I would say be curious. Be
Mhm.
curious, and whatever your mind and you feel like it fits your abilities and your makeup, go after it. Work hard, but be curious. I think when you're young, try to experience as many things as possible, and as you go, you learn, you develop, you grow. And I think that's probably the best advice when I look back at my life that I'd want to have, and hopefully I tried to live by um, throughout my life when I was 18.
Yeah, so that was one thing that I told our students this year is, everyone whines and, why do I have to take so many electives in college and this and that? But I was like, those electives are there to make you a better, well-rounded person. And
Mm,
sometimes those electives will be the what sparks your purpose in life. So don't
yeah,
look at them as something that you have to do. Think of them as something that you get to do. You get to explore something that maybe I went to a very rural high school. There wasn't electives. And
mm,
so when I went to college, it was, this whole world open to me. And, there was the chance for me to be curious about a lot of different things. And so that's kind of how I fell into education. That wasn't a path that had even crossed my mind. So
mhm.
that is good advice. Just be curious. So,
Yeah. And you don't always have to know exactly what you want to be doing, especially at a young age. I think there is a lot of pressure to feel like you need to know exactly what you want to be doing at 18
uh-huh.
years old. But you don't. You just go through life, learn to work hard, take experiences, be curious, and then as you go, all these things accumulate and you adapt and you adjust each stop along the way. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, so I had made a goal because I got married very young, and then I didn't get my degree, my bachelor's and my master's until I was much older. I'd raised my family first, and so I had set a goal to get my doctorate by the time I was 45, and so I had maybe 4 months before I turned 45, I finally got it.
Awesome.
Everyone was like, "What are you going to do now? What are you going to do now? What are you doing?" And I was like, you know what? I really don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So even at 45, I wasn't really sure what direction my life was going to take. So,
I
and sometimes that direction just kind of knocks you in the head. And that's what happened to me. And that's, that's how I ended up here. But, sometimes you just have to let fate take control and put you where you're supposed to be.
Absolutely. I think that's a great perspective. And I think when I think about making decisions when you're young, it's just learning to follow your curiosity like you're talking about, but then even for a lot of people, we still don't know what we're going to be when we grow up, right?
Yeah.
We're always learning and growing. And I think having a perspective of always learning and growing and learning from other people, surrounding yourself with great people is really important. And then whenever you make a decision, make that decision the best decision at the time and always learn to grow and adapt.
Yeah, that is great advice. So Bailey, I appreciate your time with us today. And everyone, after you have listened to this podcast of the core principles of leadership, make sure that you go search for Building Excellence. It's a weekly podcast hosted by Bailey. And then you can find more information about Bailey and his Building Excellence leadership at baileymiles.com. So, everyone, please go check him out. And I just appreciate your time today. And I appreciate what you're doing in the leadership world. And it's just leadership development is an important industry. And I just thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah, well, Jill, thank you so much. I love what you guys are doing and appreciate all the kind of hard work that you do with the podcast and leadership. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right. Well, you have a great day. Thanks. Bye bye.
You too.
Thank you again to REI Oklahoma for making this podcast possible. For nearly 40 years, the board, staff, patrons, and supporters of the nonprofit economic development REI Oklahoma have been committed to expanding Oklahoma's economic prosperity, earning the reputation of being one of the most comprehensive economic development organizations in the country. Business lines, training workshops, business consulting, and networking opportunities, as well as technical assistance and even commercial business space are made available to Oklahoma entrepreneurs and small businesses. For low and moderate income individuals and families, down payment and or closing cost assistance is offered. Learn more at reiok.org. On behalf of the 4-Star Leadership with General Tommy Franks team, I'm your host, Dr. Jill Green, and this has been the Core Principles of Leadership with General Tommy Franks podcast. Now it's your turn, podcast listeners. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let us know what you think of this episode and all our other episodes. Share this podcast with all the leaders and up-and-coming leaders in your circles. Be sure to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast listening platform, and don't forget to mark your calendars the last Friday of each month for another inspiring episode. So for now, as General Franks always says, go be feisty.